Dog Turks, Cenk, Uygur, and Kasparian with you guys. Big show ahead, but I want to tell you about a big week. I should have told you about this yesterday, but we got elections all this week. And then a day, as my daughter used to say when she was 2, that means we're done until the general election. So these are the last of the primaries, the last of the Mohicans tonight. New Hampshire tonight, Rhode Island tomorrow night, and New York on Thursday night. So Cynthia Nixon's up in New York, Matt Brown's up in Rhode Island. So there's some huge elections coming up. They're all right after the show. So you know the show's 6 to 8 p.m. Eastern live, tyt.com/live. And then at 8:05, election night starts tonight, New Hampshire. We'll do all that for you guys. We have a lot of 9/11 stories for you guys today, as of course today's the 17th anniversary of that tragic day, including Donald Trump's self-indulgence, etc. Then Donald Trump realizes water is wet. I am not joking. That's a little bit later in the program. It turns out water is actually very wet, okay? And before Trump, we did not know that. Okay, but before we do all that, let's do our quick check-in as we are doing every day in the membership drive on the thermometer. So we started at 27,761 last week, exactly a week ago. Yesterday we ended at 30,460. We ended the show on that. I wanted to see if we get to 500 by the end of the day. Let's see if we got there. And the current numbers are 539. It's okay, it's okay. God bless. Okay, tyt.com/join to support the show and get all the content. Now I get complaints, and this is a good complaint to get. You guys have too many progressive shows, and it's hard to keep up with all of them. Well, God bless. Thank you. We appreciate that. We'll have more updates on our programming, etc., as we go along, especially tomorrow. I think probably do a big conversation around some of that. But meanwhile, I want to tell you about one other thing that we're offering you guys. We're going to do a town hall for the members. So that is going to be next Monday. That's going to be with yours truly. So that's a fun picture. tyt.com/join to become a member, and then at 7 o'clock Pacific, 10 o'clock Eastern, next Monday, I'll be doing a town hall with you guys and answering all your questions. So get your questions ready, become a member, and I'll see you over there. All right, let's go forward.
All right. Today marks the 17th anniversary of 9/11, and while it's important to talk about all the various White House officials and politicians who have released statements to mention this day, I think it's important to also talk about how much we as US taxpayers have spent on wars that have been justified by those very politicians after the events of 9/11. So just to give you an idea of something that we have spent trillions of dollars on, while simultaneously arguing that we can't provide healthcare or education for our citizens, the US has spent $1.5 trillion on various wars after 9/11, okay? So wars in Afghanistan, Iraq, and Syria have cost US taxpayers more than $1.5 trillion, and that's again since September 11th, 2001. So I'm gonna give you a breakdown of that spending in just a minute.
Okay, so let's just note our priorities as a country. First of all, we got attacked on 9/11. I still remember that day, and we lost nearly 3,000 people. It was incredibly traumatic, and it was as direct an attack on our soil as we have ever had. So did we want to chase down the guys who did it? Absolutely. If you don't know the story, New York Times had an excellent report a couple of years later about how we actually had bin Laden cornered in Afghanistan, and that was before our invasion of Iraq. But Rumsfeld would not send a general to go get him, and that is maddening. And the trillions of dollars we have lost since then. But were we right to go after Osama bin Laden? Yes, I think we were. So would we have spent some money doing that? Yes, we would have. Okay, but $1.5 trillion, we've been in Afghanistan 17 years. We went to Iraq, made a mess of it. We're like, oh, we're gonna go get Al Qaeda. Okay, now we have ISIS, that's even worse, and they just did several attacks inside Afghanistan as we speak 17 years later. So what did we get in return? Finally, a dead bin Laden many years later, having almost nothing to do with the wars that we executed. We got a giant mess in the Middle East that cost hundreds of thousands of innocent civilian lives, cost more than 5,000 of our American service members' lives, 50,000 that were maimed and injured. What could we have done instead with the $1.5 trillion? So there's 1,000 things we could have done, but let me just talk about 2 real quick. One is healthcare. Could you imagine if we spent the $1.5 trillion in healthcare, how many more lives we would have saved, let alone the lives that were cost by these wars? So that is just when you think, look, I haven't seen a calculation of it, but my guess is you spent $1.5 trillion in healthcare, you would have saved hundreds of thousands of American lives. Instead, what really struck me, I was doing an interview with a progressive guest from New York recently on Rebel headquarters, and he's pushing for single payer in the state of New York. And he made a great point, I don't know why I never thought about it this way. He said, some of my constituents, if their kids get cancer and they didn't have insurance, and remember, about 15% of the country doesn't have insurance. The kid's dead. That's it. You don't have any money. You can't afford cancer treatment. You can't take them to the emergency room. Your kid dies. We could have saved their lives if we hadn't spent this $1.5 trillion on these wars. And then finally, we could get rid of every student loan in the country. Not college for all. That's much easier and way less expensive. I'm talking about all the student debt that exists in the country, all wiped out in a second.
And student loan debt is at $1.4 trillion.
So, and by the way, we could have taken that $100 billion that easily killed bin Laden and taken out Al-Qaeda from Afghanistan. And no one in the country would have student debt. How amazing, miraculous would that be? Instead, we cost all those lives and made the Middle East so much more unstable.
I mean, doesn't it make the American people angry that our taxpayer money can't be used to help benefit our lives, enrich our lives, improve our lives? That money is easily spent. I mean, the one piece of legislation that easily gets approved, okay, by both Congress and the White House is the National Defense Authorization Act, okay? There's never any debate about it. You just increase the amount of money you want to spend on our military, on the defense budget, there's never any debate. So remember, after 9/11 happened, one of the wars that we started in 2003 was the preemptive war in Iraq. And the Bush administration purposely made it seem as though Iraq was behind 9/11 when it was not. So we have spent a lot of money there, and I want to break it down based on military operations. So a lot of that money, the $1.5 trillion, did go toward military operations, but not all of it, okay? So as I mentioned, $1.5 trillion, but about $185.5 billion of that went toward military operations. When you break it down, $134.3 billion went to Operation Freedom's Sentinel in Afghanistan. Operation Inherent Resolve in Syria and Iraq was $23.5 billion. Operation Noble Eagle for Homeland Security in the United States and Canada was $27.7 billion. So that's not, the last bullet point there is about national security, preserving national security. It's not about war, but we spend a ton of money in interventionist wars as well. How much have we spent on aiding Saudi Arabia in Yemen? That's not included on this list. We're involved in all sorts of nonsense throughout the world. And is it to keep us safe, or is it to keep weapons manufacturers and private military contractors wealthy?
So one more thing about this. 1.5 trillion is very likely an understatement because most of these calculations do not include the cost of healthcare for veterans going forward. Well, we wouldn't. So would they need healthcare overall? Of course they would. But did they need extra healthcare because of PTSD, traumatic injuries, the disabled veterans? Yes. When you add that on top of it, then it gets closer to $2 trillion. And what did we saw with it? There was just a bombing on last Wednesday in Afghanistan, killed 20 people. One of our soldiers just got killed, and another one wounded this Monday. So as in yesterday. We're still losing soldiers in Afghanistan. For what? Al-Qaeda hasn't been there. Bin Laden hasn't been there in 17 years. They left immediately. They ran. And in fact, if we were competent, we had them cornered in Tora Bora. And did you know this? Again, go back and read that story from the New York Times. It's an amazing story that they wrote. The Al-Qaeda, led by bin Laden, did their last prayers because they thought, well, they've got us cornered. And we let him go. Oh my God, it's maddening. And meanwhile, Rumsfeld said inside the administration back then, well, Afghanistan's not a target-rich environment. Iraq is a target-rich environment. Look at that verbiage. In other words, our defense contractors can make a lot more money if we bomb Iraq. There's not enough things to bomb in Afghanistan. And now ISIS is the one that did that attack last week. ISIS is in Afghanistan. It didn't even exist before we invaded Iraq. It's even worse than Al-Qaeda. And now we say, no, we gotta spend more money to make sure we can now defeat ISIS. Oh, for God's sake. You know we have 14,000 troops left in Afghanistan?
Yep.
Or 14,000 Americans overall? What are we doing? Is it gonna take 18 years, 19 years to accomplish what? I bet if you asked Trump or anyone else in the administration, what are you trying to accomplish in Afghanistan? They couldn't possibly answer you.
Defense Secretary Jim Mattis gave a short speech today to commemorate 9/11, and he did touch on our actions abroad. And I thought that this portion of his speech was really interesting, especially considering the verbiage. So take a listen.
Maniacs disguised in false religious garb thought by hurting us they could scare us that day. But we Americans are not made of cotton candy. We are not seaweed drifting in the current. We are not intimidated by our enemies, and Mr. President, your military does not scare. Our nation's troops today are worthy successors of our Revolutionary Army at Valley Forge, worthy successors of our valiant sailors at Midway and our Marines at Bloody Iwo Jima, and of our Air Force pilots patrolling Mig Alley. Men and women of your armed forces, America, having signed a blank check to the protection of the American people and to the defense of our Constitution, a check payable with their very lives, your military stands ready and confident to defend this country, this experiment in democracy.
So Mattis uses the phrase blank check in reference to our soldiers who risk their lives, the blank check meaning their lives when they go to these wars and based on what you hear in propaganda, to protect democracy around the world. But that's not what it's really about. We all know that. But Americans have also signed a blank check because there's no end in sight. Mattis claims, no, don't worry. When it comes to Afghanistan, we're now opening up talks with the Taliban and we're gonna have some negotiations there and hopefully there will be an end. Let me give you his exact quote. He says, we have more indications that reconciliation is no longer just a shimmer out there, no longer just a mirage. It now has some framework. There's some open lines of communication.
Now you must be so proud 17 years later. So look, Jim Mad Dog Mattis gets credit within the Trump administration because he is one of the few people who is sane in the administration, even though his nickname is literally Mad Dog. It gives you a sense of how bad the rest of the administration is. So I guess within that context, I give him credit for being a cooler head. For example, when Trump wanted to make the Syrian war far worse by trying to assassinate Assad, Mattis apparently, according to Woodward's book, ignored him, and that was the correct decision. But don't get any idea in your head that Mattis is some sort of good guy or progressive. No, like many of our generals, unfortunately, they use the troops as a punchline and as a gimmick. So they say, support the troops. Do you really support the troops? You've been wasting their lives for 17 years in Afghanistan. You know what? And we're giving money. Wait, no. You're not giving money to the troops. You're giving it to Lockheed Martin and Boeing and Raytheon. You know what the average service member comes in at, their starting salary? About $19,000.
What?
Support the troops for what? With what? You're not supporting troops. Remember when our troops were getting blown up in Iraq and Rumsfeld went to Iraq and said, and they had not prepared the one thing they needed, which was armored vehicles, because they were planting roadside bombs. They're like, Raytheon made a gorgeous nuclear sub that's sitting there in a dock somewhere that has no relevance to our wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. They got paid trillions of dollars for it, in that case, billions, but overall, yes, we spent trillions on defense contractors. But our guys getting paid $19,000 a year are getting blown up because they didn't actually protect the troops. Because why? Armored vehicles don't cost that much. I'm not talking about tanks. In that case, I'm talking about the cars that they use to put metal plates underneath them. Raytheon can't make as much money from that, so who cares? And you know what Rumsfeld said? He said, well, you go to the war with the army you have, not the one you wish you had.
Jesus.
After they wasted $1.5 trillion on their buddies, who are also their donors, And by the way, so why do I go after the generals in this case? The great majority of them retire and immediately work for defense contractors and get absolutely wealthy off those wars they sent you and your kids to die for. So that's what these generals in the military industrial complex is about. And that's how they wasted our money, wasted the lives of our troops, and used 9/11 for their own political purposes, and it's grotesque.
Let's take a break. When we come back, we're going to travel back in time and see what Donald Trump had to say about 9/11 as it had just happened.
We hope you're enjoying this free clip from the Young Turks. If you want to get the whole show and more exclusive content while supporting independent media, become a member at tyt.com/join today. In the meantime, enjoy this free segment. All right, back on the Young Turks, Cenk and Anna with you guys. I got some tweets for you guys. Beppa writes in, technically water isn't wet. All right, wise guy. All right, cool it, okay? That's about the hurricane where Trump found out that, in his words, water is very wet. So we'll get to that in a little bit. J. Thomas Gordy says, the amount of money spent on wars since 9/11 is exactly why we need to get money out of politics. By the way, join Wolfpack today. Thank you, J. Thomas Gordy. Appreciate that. Wolf-pack.com. We have got to get it out. Otherwise, we're going to keep wasting trillions of dollars. They're robbing us every single day. Texas for Beitu writes in, my hashtag TYT membership is the best $10 I spend all month. It's an investment that doesn't depreciate, and in days of alternative facts and fake news, the knowledge I get from TYT in return is priceless. Thank you, brother. Super, super appreciate it. And of course, tyt.com/join to become a member and to get all of our shows and build the home of progressives with us. Look, the reason we're trying to get to 100,000 is so that we are unshakable. And no matter what anybody does, they can't knock us down. So I hope that we get there together. Okay, now let's talk a little bit more about 9/11. So this morning, Donald Trump, of course, wants to be respectful of 9/11. So he sends a tweet complaining about collusion. All right, fine. So usual rants. We found nothing to show collusion between President Trump and Russia. Absolutely zero. Same kind of mental tweets you see on any other day. Now, this is the one day where you really hope that the president can pull it together and tell us about how he cares about the people we lost on 9/11 and the troops that went to go avenge them, and et cetera. The typical stuff that presidents do is sometimes they go over the top, et cetera. But Trump doesn't have any of those issues. He just doesn't.
He's a sociopath.
Yeah, he doesn't know, he doesn't care.
He doesn't care.
So now to the point about a sociopath. Okay, so he starts the day with me. I'm not guilty. I don't know what you're talking about. I'm not guilty, right? All right, that's the usual. Then the second tweet is about 9/11. He retweeted a post by White House aide Dan Scavino bragging about how Trump had signed a proclamation designating today as Patriot Day. So it's about 9/11. But it's about him bragging, well, I made it Patriot Day. I made it Patriot Day. Okay, all right, we go to tweet number 3. Okay, it's about 9/11, but wait till you see what it is. Rudy Giuliani did a great job as mayor of New York City during the period of September 11th. His leadership, bravery, and skill must never be forgotten. Rudy is a true warrior. Rudy Giuliani, of course, is his personal lawyer now, defending him on the issue of collusion. So without yet mentioning the lives that were lost, talking about how Rudy was this incredible hero, and not that the attacks must not be forgotten, not that the people we lost, our citizens, must not be forgotten, but how awesome Rudy Giuliani, my personal lawyer, was, must not be forgotten. Unbearable, unbearable. And by the way, okay, and some people get mad, so prepare. Look, conservatives, find your safe space because you're about to get triggered. Rudy Giuliani gets ridiculous credit for 9/11 when he didn't do anything. He showed up at the scene of a crime. Congratulations. So, you know, the only actual tangible thing he did was he put the communication center in case of emergencies inside the World Trade Center, which blew up. Now, the World Trade Center had already been attacked. Why would you put the communication center for emergencies in the one place in New York that had already been attacked? That's because if you're stupid, that's what you do. And then he shows up in front of all the cameras. He's like, I'm in charge, I'm in charge. Well, meanwhile, firefighters and cops died in those buildings because they couldn't communicate. But I'm supposed to now turn around and give Rudy Giuliani credit because he's Trump's lawyer, and all he ever does, he's so gross. You remember that line from Biden in the elections where Rudy Giuliani was running for president, got humiliated, of course, run out of town, came in 5th in Florida, was the only place he can be. He was the worst, right? But every debate, Giuliani would go out there and, as Biden said, say 9/9/11. Why? Because, oh, me, 9/11. I happened to be in New York when 9/11 happened. You're gross, Giuliani. You two deserve each other. So that's what Trump did today. Oh, I'm not even done. One last thing. He goes to Pennsylvania to remember the heroes of United 93, and those guys were unbelievable. They didn't risk their lives. They knew they were going to lose their lives, but to make sure that the plane did not get to its target. So Trump gets there and he lands and he sees that there are some people, I think, that were applauding him. So he's like, oh yes. Forgets that, hey, I'm here for a solemn occasion, and starts doing this, like, I mean, it's not a goddamn campaign rally, but he's a sociopath. He can't help himself. Now, if you thought all that was bad, wait till you get a load of what he said on the day of 9/11. So he's on New York radio, and Anna, did he talk about the lives lost?
No, of course not.
Did he say, it's that day, man? Do you remember how, I remember that day. Any of you who are old enough, you remember that day and how we were all shaken. I had friends who lived in New York. One of my co-founders here was covered in the debris from the building, and I'm like, Jesus Christ, is he alive? Is he okay? And all the people that I know, I got family and friends. There's one guy on 9/11 who wasn't thinking that. He was thinking something else.
Yeah, so he called into WWOR in New York, and this is on the evening of 9/11. And he thought that it was a perfect opportunity to brag about how one of his buildings was now the tallest building in New York. I'm gonna read you his exact quote. He said, well, it was an amazing phone call. I mean, 40 Wall Street actually was the second tallest building in downtown Manhattan. And it was actually, before the World Trade Center, was the tallest. And then when they built the World Trade Center, it became the second tallest, and now it's the tallest. That was what he said on the evening of 9/11, 2001.
Not on the anniversary of 2001, on the actual day of September 11th, 2001.
Yep.
He called into a radio station to brag that he now had the tallest building in New York. He said, well, it used to be second tallest because of World Trade Center, but now that got knocked down. So now my building's the tallest. What sociopath thinks that way? Thinks, hey, this is a moment for me to brag. Hey, those big buildings got knocked down with nearly 3,000 people dead, but hey, on the upside, my building's the tallest now. This is the guy that you revere if you're a Republican? Oh God, that's so sad. And okay, then we go to 2002. By then, he's taken a whole year. Has he found out, hey, maybe people were upset about this, I should treat this with a little bit more respect? Of course not.
Right, so he goes on Howard Stern's show and talks about a 9/11 memorial, what should be built there, and here's what he had to say.
What Rudy said was there should be a huge memorial and it should contribute to the skyline of New York in the same way that the World Trade Center.
I'm starting to agree with that.
I don't know. Maybe we should build a television tower there. Maybe we should do something that would be, I don't know if you saw last week the television tower, which is substantially taller than the World Trade Center, but you don't have to occupy it.
Right.
Believe me, a statue of your girlfriend would be perfect right there.
Well, that would be a nice idea.
Well, nobody's going to fly into that, right?
No one would. No one would even mess with that.
That would be fly into that.
That would be a lesson for future generations.
Oh, that's so funny. Could you imagine if a Democratic politician went on and talked about September 11th a year afterwards, and was joking around about, hey, I got a hot girlfriend. It was girlfriend at the time, now wife. I got a hot girlfriend, maybe we build a statue of it. I mean, look, Howard brought up the joke. We all heard it right there, right? But he's going along with it like, oh yeah, maybe we should, man. Nobody would fly into that. 9/11's so funny. They would have been ridden out of town, except this guy's a joke, man. He's a joke on the whole country. And he's the biggest joke on his own supporters who think that here's a guy who respects our armed forces or wants to make America great again.
I mean, think about why he why he allegedly goes after NFL players who kneel during the national anthem, because he thinks that it disrespects our flag, it disrespects the country, disrespects our troops. Trump does that on a regular basis, but for some reason there seems to be a double standard for Trump. He gets to do and say whatever he wants. Doesn't matter how disrespectful he is. He still, earns that support for his base or toward his base. It's insane. I don't understand it. But I don't know. What else are we gonna expect from this? I'm bored. I'm tired of this.
Yeah, we get desensitized. So what a monster he is.
Yeah, I'm super desensitized at this point. This is who he is. I don't need any more evidence of it. I already know. And what drives me crazy is not only has this been normalized, but his base doesn't care. They don't care. Rudy Giuliani, he used 9/11, he exploited it for his own advantage, for his own purposes. Our federal government at the time did the exact same thing to justify, starting wars in the Middle East. They never really cared about the lives that were lost during 9/11. They just didn't. They used it for a political advantage and nothing more.
And a couple of punchlines. That's what they actually think of 9/11. Okay, now going from that to crass commercialism, other people taking advantage of 9/11.
Yeah. A number of brands throughout the United States wanted to commemorate 9/11 by promoting their products. And they got backlash for it, and I wanna give you a few examples. In New Jersey, there's a restaurant known as Acai Later, and they sell acai bowls, which sounds like a California thing and it's super annoying. But nonetheless, they decided to take an Instagram photo showing the skyline of New York with an acai bowl in the photo as well. They got so much backlash that they later took that down and then reposted the photo without the bowl.
But all the other hashtags, etc.
Yeah.
So great way to celebrate 9/11. I hope you're not doing that. Commemorate 9/11. Is with an acai bowl from the view we have at our restaurant. But it's America.
It's capitalism, isn't it?
Yeah, so whatever you gotta do, it was originally supposed to be a commemoration, it was supposed to be solemn. On the other hand, we could sell some fruit bowls that we're calling acai bowls, and we could put it in there with a nice view and make some money off of it. Welcome to America.
But isn't this, look, I'm actually amazed that they got enough backlash, they took the original photo down, because this kind of shameless self-promotion is celebrated in the country. It's celebrated in every facet of life, regardless of what you do for a living, okay? You know how it is for us, like, oh, you work in news? What's your Twitter following? What's your Instagram following? Are you posting enough? Are you active on social media? Are you promoting yourself enough? Non-stop promotion, promote, 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 promote. It's a symptom of capitalism, it is. And I am not against a capitalistic system, but this is a symptom of it.
Yeah, I thought Christianity was not about materialism. That was what Jesus Christ preached was the opposite of materialism. Give away all your worldly goods to the poor, the needy, and help your fellow man. But we have somehow twisted it in this country so that, there's literally a thing called prosperity gospel that if you don't live in America, you have to be confounded by. Like, really, that's a thing? They took Jesus's literal words of saying, give away all your worldly goods and you have no chance of getting into heaven if you're rich. It said it's harder to get for a rich man to get into heaven than for a camel to pass through the eye of a needle. And they took that and said, oh, you see that? Jesus wants you to be absurdly rich. First, he wants your pastor to be incredibly rich, and he wants him to have private jets and limos. Then he wants you to be rich, and he wants all of you guys to focus on nothing but materialism. In fact, we'll take his birthday, we'll get him out of there because he looks homeless. Get him out. Put in a fat Santa in a red suit that gives away stuff that you actually have to pay for, okay? And we'll drive towards that, and then no matter how solemn the occasion is, birth of Jesus or 9/11, just sell, baby. And then whatever the original message of America was, or the Bible was, or anything else was, everybody's forgotten. On a day especially when the theme is never forget.
Right.
So, and the acai bowl, by the way, is just one of many examples. Let's just run through the others.
I feel bad that we've only talked about that because there have been a number of other companies who have done something similar. Back in 2013, for instance, AT&T wanted to show off their inventory of new iPhones. And so they posted a photo holding an iPhone with the New York skyline in the background. So very similar to the acai bowl. And then I actually want to skip ahead to graphic 40 because this is the one that was like insane. So that was from last year, and it is promoting, what is that, Chewbacca?
Yeah, that's Chewbacca. I don't know, is it promoting Star Wars? I don't know. Just, okay, leave it be, leave it be. But we can't because it's America and we gotta make a buck. But look, final thing on it is, what did George W. Bush, the president at the time, say right after the attacks? So at other great moments, our presidents have stood up and given inspiring speeches that wound up making a difference. FDR talked about this is a day that will live in infamy, referring to Pearl Harbor. He said, we have nothing to fear but fear itself. And JFK was amazing during the Cuban Missile Crisis. And he had great lines in other instances where he said, don't ask what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country. Inspire people. What did George W. Bush say after 9/11? Go shopping. Literally, he gave a speech in response, and the main theme was just go back to normal life, and he literally said, just continue shopping.
Can you imagine if a woman said that?
Oh.
Can you just imagine for 1 second if a female politician said that?
Let's just go back to shopping, okay? Because the shopping must not be interrupted by tragedy. And so this is, as Anna points out, a symptom of that initial problem to begin with. And by the way, I believe in balance. I think that we could actually have capitalism that doesn't run amok, that doesn't take over all of our lives and turn us into all materialistic pigs that are obsessed with things we must have because our neighbor has it. We could actually be decent to one another and still have private enterprise. That's what I believe, but apparently I'm in the minority.
They have a lot of that in Scandinavian countries, don't they?
Yeah.
They have private enterprise there.
And they make good furniture and good meatballs.
They sure do, actually. They do. Okay. All right, let's take a break. When we come back, some international news for you, including possible sanctions against China for its treatment of Muslims.
No, that's a trippy story.
Very trippy. I have theories on why this is happening.
And in fact, Trump, at least the Trump administration, is going out of its way to defend Uyghurs. Not kidding. We'll explain when we come back.